YouTube channel. It's me, noted bisexual and financial advisor Gabby Dunn. I'm not actually a financial advisor, but I do have a podcast called Bad with Money, which is about finances and feelings. Right now, we're going to show you a clip from an episode that we did about dress codes. They are racist, ableist, transphobic, sexist, and classist. And we're going to get into it. We're going to talk to Amanda Mull, a writer at The Atlantic, who wrote an article about why sweatpants should be the new normal and there should be no more office dress codes. And then we talked to author Rich Ford, who wrote a book called Dress Codes, all about the fascinating history of clothing and the gendered ways that it has changed from the 1300s to today. So give it a listen. At the link in the bio, you will hear the full episode. And if you like this clip, go check it out. Our dress codes: racist, sexist, classist, ableist, transphobic. You're talking about having to wear high heels. You know, you're talking about, like, I think for people who wear women's clothing, they have to have a lot more options because you can't wear the same dress twice in 1 week, or even, like, you know, the whole thing that always happens with, like, if you're a Black woman, cut your dreadlocks. Like, is this something that you've seen, that it's just like all of these things?
Yeah, I think that, like, traditional expectations of dress codes are based on the sort of, like, Industrial Revolution era assumption that about who does certain types of work and how best to sort of, like, control them, because that's when, like, the labor market in the United States became more formalized and people started having to go into work somewhere in really, really large numbers. Before that happened, that wasn't really a thing that existed. And because the labor force was so overwhelmingly male for a long time, the standards of how people should dress were just always based on the sort of need to not like mind control, but it's definitely one of those things that companies instituted at some point because it helps sort of, like, break down people's individuality. And make them part of the whole instead of like individually identifiable, and that has some, you know, for bosses, that has some psychological advantages. So because that was the purpose of it, and because the default was men, and in many cases white men, you end up with these sort of, like, assumptions that have been carried forward kind of mindlessly about how people will dress and what is the default and things. I think that a lot of things that people don't, like, actively intend to be sexist or racist or transphobic or ableist just sort of get, like, sloppily ascribed to tradition and how we've always done things, and this is how the company has been for a long time. And that brings forward with it sort of a lot of assumptions about who the employees are and what we should expect people to act like and look like and dress like, that end up being much harder for some people than others, in a way that is, I think, indicative of how little thought goes into the well-being of working people.
Can we talk about, speaking of men getting to do what they want, can we talk about the red sneakers effect? Because when I was reading about it, I was like, this is only going to apply to dudes.
Yes, it's the red sneakers effect is sort of interesting. And I think that it's one of those things that applies better probably applies more often to men, but also just applies better in certain types of jobs. And, you know, I can see it being useful in certain types of office jobs, certain types of knowledge work. But in other types of jobs, I just don't think that kind of thing will be rewarded.
Can you explain what it is to my audience?
I might need to refresh myself if that's okay.
It was basically like if you dress weirdly or differently at work, it might work in your favor because people will think, oh, this person's quirky, or, oh, this person, like, has something to offer. Or, you know, I think you kind of looped it in a bit with Mark Zuckerberg's hoodie, or, like, someone, you know, somebody who shows up to work quite literally in red sneakers, right? Oh, that person's different and weird, and it might help you, like, stand out. We always hear this stuff about, like, it changing for men and women, right? Like, oh, the pink was originally a boy's color and men wore heels and wigs first and all this stuff. So can we get into that? Like, what were things before and when did things kind of solidify into what we know today as Western gender norms?
Yes, well, in the late Middle Ages, and I start there because a lot of historians describe this as the birth of fashion. It's when you started to get advanced tailoring techniques, and you could create these really expressive kind of sculptural garments. So they not only skimmed the body, but you get like puffy sleeves or big collars and things like this. And that, from that period of time till about the mid 1700s, all of the most sexy and advanced fashion started as men's fashions. And men's and women's fashions were much more similar than they were after the 1700s. So there was a certain complementarity. It's not that men and women wore the same clothing, but if you look at, for instance, Henry VIII and then his daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, there's something really similar about the clothing they're wearing. Now, the big difference even then was that women always had to be draped below the waist. Trousers for women were not acceptable. It's an interesting question. One of the reasons is that as these advances in fashion started, tailoring was initially associated with masculine fashion because it started in Europe at least with undergarments that were worn under plate armor. And the knights were super high status. Of course, this was high-tech military gear at the time, but also they were always men. In addition, there was really, it seemed to emerge a kind of strange phobia of women's legs, women's nether regions. They had to be obscured. So there was a real sense, and this continued until the early 20th century, that a woman wearing anything tailored below the waist like trousers was quite scandalous. She was almost certainly going to be considered up to no good. There was a crime of sexual misrule, and wearing pants was considered to be evidence of sexual misrule.
Because because women might be able to move faster?
Yeah. Well, part of it was that it suggested the body below the waist, and these masculine fashions, if you look at them, I mean, they were pretty sexy. They're tights. Yeah. In the Renaissance, you had cod pieces, which were clearly, designed to suggest male genitalia, and so these things were assertions of sexual prerogative. In other words, it was aggressive, and women were to be modest and demure, and so wearing that type of clothing was suggesting that the woman was asserting this kind of masculine social privilege, and that, of course, was a threat to the social order.
Weird. Okay, so then you're saying fashion started for men, so like they were wearing heels and women weren't? It's like those buckle shoes, heels things? Is that what we're talking about?
Initially with high heels. High heels came into Europe in, I believe it was the late 1500s, and they were adopted from Persian equestrians, horse riders. So the heel was designed to hook into the stirrup. And when these Persian equestrians came to Europe, they were really exotic and really sexy and really virile. And so people, men, wanted to adopt that style for themselves and started wearing these high heels. And over time, the high heel became a status symbol. And so, of course, it needed to get bigger and bigger and more exaggerated so everyone would notice. By the time you get to Louis XIV, for instance, you have these huge high heels that are painted red so that everyone will notice them. And he even passed laws prohibiting anyone outside his royal court from wearing shoes with red soles or red heels.
Louboutins!
Yes, exactly. It's got to be the precursor for Louboutins.
This is so fast. I'm like, every sentence that you're saying, I'm blown away.